Open source software. Ever since I learned what it is, and I was surprisingly old before I became familiar with the concept of open source, I have viewed it as a gift that someone somewhere spent a lot of time to give me something for free when they could have been making money doing something else probably. And it is just a gift to be able to get open source stuff like FreeCAD, Blender, Audacity, Kdenlive, all these great platforms that I actually use on my channel truly are so generous of developers to do this sort of thing. And I just found another open source platform. Now, when I approach open source, I tend to think of it a little bit differently than a paid software, right? Because open source is more of a gift, a paid software is more of a business transaction. So I was quite excited to see that there was a cool software known as SolveSpace. I want to show you a few things that I was able to make just after a day or two of installing it. So here I have a compressor. I think SolveSpace did a pretty good job at modeling this thing. You can tell the graphics are a little bit rough here, but that's, I think, to be expected with the way that I modeled this. I think I'll do a video on modeling this, and maybe we can make the same thing in FreeCAD and see how it goes. Another cool thing that I was able to make is you can see the name of my channel here. And if I turn this, I have the logo that shows up, and you have a model like this built in FreeCAD that has my name on one side and my logo on the other with a little light shining. In fact, this is at the beginning of this video, at least it should be when I edit it in. So this is, I think, not a trivial model to make, but I think, SolveSpace is way cool to be able to make something like this. This is a practice part. This was one of my more highly viewed parts in FreeCAD, so I wanted to put SolveSpace to the test, and it made this thing beautifully. SolidSpace can also work with assemblies pretty well, as you can see from being able to move this linkage back and forth, often called an assembly or mechanical analysis within SolveSpace, and it wasn't too hard to make either. So why don't we start going through the user interface and some of the details of SolidSpace. I'll start by making a new part. And we open up to what looks like this. It kind of reminds me of AutoCAD. I am not very good at 2D software. It's a completely different mentality. Well, that's what I immediately thought when I opened this up. Looks like AutoCAD. Over here, we have the property browser in its own window. And we have certain things. All of these up here control certain objects in the graphics display that will or will not be displayed. Down here is the actual history tree. And we have two items that are populated in our history tree right now. Right, we have references, and I can toggle these references to show or not show them. And I also have a sketch in plane, right? So we open up to an active sketch immediately. And this is our active sketch. And I can click on these things to get some more details and adjust a few parameters about the active sketch that we're in. To go back, I click on Home, and then I can always click on an object again to edit some of its aspects. Over here we have a line tool, rectangle, sketching stuff up top, circle, arc, sketch text, insert an image. You can create a tangent arc, a spline, you can do a datum point, you can toggle your existing sketch for being construction geometry. You have this nice little intersect here, and it's kind of a cool little intersect, right? If I draw some intersecting lines, I highlight two where they collide, and I click the intersect button, it splits them up into individual parts. Kind of a quick, lightweight, easy way of splitting up a sketch. Down here you have constraints. You have linear dimension, angular dimension, a horizontal and vertical constraint, parallel or tangent depending on what you click on. You have perpendicular, coincident, you have a symmetric constraint, you have equal. This one's kind of cool. This is for assemblies, and that helps you to orient parts. This is an angle, And this is to change things for reference. Down here you have all of your solid stuff, right? You have extrude, revolve, polar pattern, linear pattern. This is creating a new group, which I think is assembly related, but I haven't really used these. This is like an insert part, and these are view controls, isometric and normal to your work plane. Like in a lot of CAD platforms, you have a working plane. When you first open it up, your working plane is the XY plane, you know, the one that you default to in the active sketch. And since we have an active sketch, we might as well sketch something out. I'm going to make an unconstrained rectangle right now. In fact, maybe I should constrain it. That'd be great. I can choose a point, a plane, a point, as I have, and we'll add in symmetry. All right, so now we're symmetric around here. And this is actually a failed solver. The reason, and that's why our screen has changed background. The reason is because this point and this point are now symmetric across this plane. This vertical constraint becomes redundant. So there's a few things that you can do. The first thing is I click on the V and delete an overdefining constraint, and our background returns to normal. The other thing that you can do, and I don't know if this is all that common in other platforms, but if we go back home, I can click on my sketch and I can say allow redundant constraints, and that also fixes our sketch. I do not prefer that, but it's an option if you need for some reason. I can add in a dimension here. I can choose this point and this line, and it will automatically add in a dimension the way that I want it. And we can make that something like 20 millimeters. Now, as I'm going through and defining this, I can always scroll down here and say 2 degrees of freedom, right? This allows me to check on how many degrees of freedom my sketch has. Very, very handy feature. Also on the home, you can see that's my degrees of freedom, and that summarizes it very nicely in the history tree. Let's go with another dimension over here. This is going to be 80. This is going to be, let's make this 90, right? And we have OK, which OK in degrees of freedom means that we are fully constrained. So we can tell that this is a fully constrained sketch now. So our options are we can extrude this, and I click on this button to extrude, and it gives me a few options. One-sided is your typical extrude that's coming straight out of the plane. I can check this box here for two-sided, and that makes sure that we are having the plane in the center. We can choose union, which is simply, you know, additive, straight up just adding material. You can choose assemble, and that would, I believe, combine the material with any other existing bodies. Or, you know, I'm still pretty new to this platform, but I'll get back to you on that. Don't trust what I'm saying about that. You have difference, that is subtractive, right? You would subtract material if you were to intersect that with any existing material, which we don't have here. And you have intersection, which is a really cool feature, and that keeps material that overlaps with another body. So I'll stick with union for now. You can adjust the color. You can suppress the solid model from the group if that helps somehow. Of course, this is just for showing the entities, and in this case it's the sketch and extrusion entities from this group. So if I go home and I go back to my view panel up here, I can hide my solid shaded view, and I can even hide my lines. And if I go back into my extrude here, then when I uncheck show entities, you can see the entities that are not being shown anymore. So you may be confused because we have 1 degree of freedom, and of course that's our extrude length, and there's nothing in this menu that allows us to set the extrude length. I think this is a really slick feature on the user interface, and it's caused me to think a little bit differently about the workflow that you do in CAD. Never seen anything like this, but you come over here to what we were using as a sketch entity. I select an edge, right? I'll select this edge that we can see more clearly, and I simply choose linear dimension, and it adds our extrude length to the solid. I thought that was pretty handy. So what if we want to roll back to our sketch? Well, we have this little active column here, right? So I click this button, and now I can see my sketch, and I can parametrically adjust it any way that I want to. And then I simply click the box to roll it back forward. So in this way you have a complete history tree that you can roll back and roll forward. Very handy. I find that to be a very, very effective way to deal with a history tree. And you see a similar structure in the big platforms, right? SolidWorks has something like that, Creo has something like that. And when it's so clear that you can just see step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, how the part was built, and there's no confusion as to what element went where, when. I think this is a very clear history tree to work with, in my opinion. You also have this nice little hide all features, and you're left with the shaded solid. Or if you hide your shaded solid, you're left with nothing apparently. You can show the mesh that makes it up. You can show some of the edges, or here's the edges. This was I'll show the outline, yes, but I like the shaded view, and so we can show all as well, and that shows all of the stuff that belongs with how we've defined the part. So if you are dealing with something in your views, then these boxes here and also these views up here, and you can show a combination of the mesh and the shaded view, or whatever you want. It's pretty flexible. You can also show your hidden edges, which is quite handy at times. Okay, next thing that we can do, maybe we want to pattern this, right? Or use some of these other feature elements. I'm going to actually hide this. Yeah, that's fine. And let's say I want to revolve this around the origin. Well, for that I choose the origin, and I choose the axis that I want to revolve around. And that's very important. You choose both the point and the axis. And let's say we do a circular pattern, right? Well, there's 3 elements around the axis. And up here you can choose either one-sided or a two-sided rotation. And I'm going to change this to, say, 2 patterns, so I don't have anything overlapping. That is pretty cool and a very nice feature. I think that is pretty sufficient to get you started with this platform. I want to continue by making some other uploads of actually creating some cool models like what I've shown you in the beginning of this video, and we'll go through some of the techniques that I've used to do that. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please subscribe, and I'll really look forward to seeing you on the next one. I'm excited to have yet another platform on this channel. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.